The wind screams across the canyon like a wounded animal, driving snow so thick it swallows the world whole. Through this white fury, a shadow moves with impossible grace, a figure wrapped in buffalo hide, his breath forming ice crystals that the storm devours before they can fall. The man's dark eyes scan the treacherous landscape, reading signs invisible to others, the way snow drifts around a hidden boulder, the subtle depression that marks a game trail, the particular whistle of wind that warns of a cliff's edge just ahead. But tonight, something else catches his attention, a sound that doesn't belong to the storm's symphony. A human cry, weak and desperate, carried on the savage wind like a prayer to uncaring gods. The Apache brave stops, tilting his head, his weathered face tense with concentration. There it is again, the unmistakable sound of someone dying in the white death that has claimed this mountain. Iana's teachings echo in his mind, "Tha'd shove and the spirits test us not through our enemies, but through strangers who need what we can give." Asterisk, his grandmother's words, spoken in firelight winters ago, now seem like prophecy. He adjusts his grip on the hunting rifle slung across his shoulder and turns toward the sound, knowing that whatever he finds in this blizzard will change everything. The storm has brought him something that will demand more courage than any battle, more wisdom than any hunt, and more compassion than his tribe may understand. As he disappears into the swirling white, the mountain holds its breath, waiting to see what destiny the blizzard has carried on its winds. The man moving through the storm is Dakota Yazzie, 26 winters old, with hands that can track a deer through rock, and eyes that see truth, where others find only shadows. His hair, black as obsidian, and braided with eagle feathers earned in battle, streams behind him in the wind. 3 jagged scars across his left cheek tell the story of a grisly encounter that should have killed him, would have killed him if not for reflexes honed by a lifetime in these unforgiving mountains. 6 moons ago, the Apache Wars claimed his younger brother Nalish, shot down by cavalry soldiers during a peaceful hunting expedition. The loss carved a hollow in Dakota's chest that no amount of vengeance could fill. Where once he rode with war parties, now he hunts alone, preferring the honest company of wind and stone to the bitter anger that consumed his people. His father, Chief Hastian, calls him Ghost Walker On, who moves between the world of the living and the realm of spirits, belonging fully to neither. This morning, Dakota left the winter camp hidden in the canyon's protection, following elk sign toward the high country. He carries his grandfather's rifle, a weapon taken from a cavalry officer in the battle at Lost Valley, and wears moccasins his mother beaded before the sickness took her. His medicine pouch holds sage, blessed by the tribal elder, a piece of turquoise from the sacred mountain, and a lock of his brother's hair, reminders of who he is and who he has lost. The storm found him at midday, rolling in from the north like an avalanche of cloud and fury. A wise man would have sought shelter immediately, but something deeper than wisdom drives him forward. Call it curiosity, call it fate, call it the restless hunger of a soul seeking purpose beyond revenge. Whatever force guides his steps through the blinding snow, it leads him steadily toward a sound that grows clearer with each careful step. When he first sees her, Dakota thinks the cold has made him hallucinate. No white woman should be this far into Apache territory, especially not one heavy with child, especially not in a storm that would challenge even the most experienced mountain man. Yet there she lies, half buried in a snowdrift beside a overturned wagon, her lips blue with cold and her belly round as a harvest moon. Her auburn hair spills across the white ground like spilled blood, and her green eyes flutter with the kind of delirium that comes just before death claims the lost. She wears a traveling dress of deep blue wool, now torn and soaked through, and clutching a leather satchel as if it contains her very soul. No husband visible, no companions, just a woman alone in the wilderness with a child ready to enter the world. The wagon beside her tells a story of disaster: broken axle, scattered supplies, horses probably run off in panic when the storm hit. She murmurs words in English, fragments about someone named Thomas, and promises to a god who seems to have abandoned her to die in the snow. Dakota crouches beside her, studying her face. She's young, maybe 20 winters, with the soft hands of someone raised far from hardship. But her jaw carries the stubborn line of a fighter, and even in her extremity, she clutches that satchel with determination that speaks of fierce protective instincts. When her eyes focus on him through the falling snow, fear flickers across her features, then desperation overcomes prejudice as another contraction twists her body with pain. "Please," she whispers, the word barely audible above the storm's howl. Help me. In her eyes, Dakota sees the same desperate love he witnessed in his mother's face when fever took her, the look of someone fighting not for themselves, but for the life they carry. Without words, he begins gathering fallen canvas from the wagon, his movements quick and efficient. Survival demands action, not conversation, and this mountain shows no mercy to those who hesitate. The child coming into this storm doesn't know about the hatred between red and white, doesn't care about the wars that have stained these mountains with blood. A baby knows only need, for warmth, for safety, for the chance to draw first breath in a world that may not welcome what it represents. As Dakota works to build shelter from the wind, he realizes this moment will test everything his grandmother taught him about the sacred responsibility of life, everything his father taught him about protecting those who cannot protect themselves. The storm rages around them, but in this small space between the overturned wagon and a stand of pine trees, something unprecedented begins. An Apache warrior and a white woman, bound together by forces neither chose, preparing to bring new life into a world torn by ancient conflicts. When the baby's cries finally pierce the wind's howl, both their destinies will change forever. The woman's name is Sarah McKenna, and her story unravels between gasps of pain as Dakota works to save her life. She traveled from Pennsylvania with her husband Thomas, chasing dreams of land and gold in the Colorado Territory. 3 days ago, Thomas left their camp to scout ahead, promising to return by sunset. When the storm struck without warning, their horses bolted, the wagon overturned, and Sarah found herself alone with labor pains that arrived like the blizzard, sudden, overwhelming, unstoppable. Dakota uses sign language and broken English learned from traders to communicate, his hands speaking volumes where words fail. He builds a lean-to from wagon canvas and pine boughs, creating a shelter barely large enough for 2 people, but tight enough to trap precious body heat. Sarah's contractions grow stronger, each one forcing a cry from her lips that the wind carries away like smoke. Through it all, she watches this Apache stranger with a mixture of terror and desperate hope, her trained prejudices warring with the primal gratitude of someone whose life hangs by the thinnest thread. Name? Dakota asks in careful English, maintaining eye contact to keep her conscious and focused. Sarah, she manages between breaths. Sarah McKenna. The baby, something's wrong. Too early. Dakota nods, understanding more than his limited English reveals. His grandmother Ayana delivered half the babies in their tribe, and he assisted her countless times before the cavalry bullets took her life. His hands know the ritual of birth, the careful positioning, the moment when intervention means the difference between life and death. But this is different. This child carries the blood of 2 worlds, and its first breath will come in a storm that seems determined to swallow all 3 of them. As he helps Sarah through another contraction, Dakota sees fear in her eyes that goes beyond physical pain. She understands the impossibility of their situation, an Apache brave delivering her white child in the middle of nowhere, during a war that has turned neighbors into enemies and strangers into targets. If they survive, if her husband returns, if anyone discovers what happened here, the consequences could destroy them all, but consequences belong to tomorrow. Tonight, there is only the wind, the snow, the rhythmic pain that signals new life struggling to enter the world, and 2 people who have become unlikely partners in the most ancient of human struggles. When Sarah grips his hand during the worst contraction yet, Dakota doesn't pull away. Her strength surprises him. This soft woman from the east has steel in her spine, determination that matches any warrior he has known. The baby arrives with the storm's fury, tiny fists fighting even before full birth, lungs strong enough to cry above the wind's howl. Dakota catches the small body in gentle hands, clearing airways with practiced skill while Sarah weeps with relief and exhaustion. The child is perfect, a girl with her mother's auburn hair and skin that carries just a hint of olive, as if the mountain itself blessed her birth with its earthy colors. As he places the baby in Sarah's arms, something shifts in the shelter's confined space. This Apache warrior who has spent months nursing hatred for everything white, finds himself looking at new life with wonder instead of anger. And Sarah, raised to fear his people as savages, sees compassion in dark eyes that have known loss and still choose to protect rather than destroy. Neither speaks as Sarah nurses her daughter for the first time, but both understand that this moment has changed them irrevocably. The baby's cries soften to contented murmurs, and outside their fragile shelter, the storm begins to lose its rage, as if even the mountain approves of this small miracle accomplished against impossible odds. When dawn breaks gray and cold over the snow-covered landscape, it illuminates three figures huddled in makeshift shelter: an Apache brave, a white woman, and a child who belongs to both worlds and neither. The blizzard has passed, leaving behind a transformed wilderness and three lives forever connected by one night when survival demanded they choose humanity over hatred. News of the rescue spreads through Willow Creek like wildfire through dry grass. Within hours of Thomas McKenna's return with a cavalry patrol, every resident knows the story: his pregnant wife found alive in the mountains, rescued by an Apache brave who delivered their child and then vanished before dawn. The tale grows with each telling, some casting Dakota as a noble savage, others whispering darker possibilities about what really happened in that shelter during the storm. Thomas McKenna stands in the center of Marlowe's general store, his weathered face tight with emotions he can barely name. He's a tall man built strong from years of farming Pennsylvania soil, with calloused hands and suspicious blue eyes that have seen too much frontier hardship. His wife and newborn daughter lie in the doctor's care, recovering from their ordeal, while he tries to make sense of a situation that challenges everything he believes about Indians and white women and the dangers of this hostile territory. She keeps asking about him, Thomas tells the gathered men, his voice rough with sleepless worry. Calls him her guardian angel, says he saved both their lives. But what was he really doing out there? What if... He can't finish the thought, but everyone understands. In 1876, the Apache Wars have made devils of all Indians in white settlers' minds, and good deeds from that quarter seem too unlikely to trust. Samuel Garrison, the town's self-appointed moral authority, strokes his gray beard with the satisfaction of a man who has always predicted disaster. No savage helps a white woman without expecting something in return, he declares, his voice carrying the weight of assumed wisdom. Mark my words, this is just the beginning. They're planning something, using your wife's gratitude to get close to the settlement. Benjamin Hayes, a Union Army veteran who has seen enough battlefield carnage to recognize genuine mercy, shakes his head slowly. I examined Sarah thoroughly. She wasn't harmed, quite the contrary. Whoever delivered that baby knew what he was doing. Professional-level skill, gentle handling, careful attention to mother and child. That's not the work of someone with evil intentions. The debate splits the room down predictable lines. Older men like Garrison remember too many Indian raids, too many friends lost to Apache arrows, too much betrayal disguised as friendship. Younger settlers, especially those with wives and children, find themselves reluctantly grateful to the stranger who saved one of their own. The women, led by Mary Holbrook, who runs the boarding house, whisper among themselves about the unprecedented nature of the rescue, an Apache brave alone with a white woman in labor, choosing protection over opportunity for revenge. Meanwhile, 20 miles south in the hidden canyon that shelters Dakota's people, a different kind of storm brews around the warrior's return. Chief Hastian listens to his son's account, with the stone face that has carried him through 50 winters of conflict, but his dark eyes reveal the calculation of a leader who must balance individual actions against tribal survival. You delivered a white baby, the chief states, his voice carrying no judgment yet, just the flat acknowledgement of fact that demands explanation. Dakota stands before the council fire, still wearing the clothes from his rescue mission, still carrying Sarah's scent and the memory of her daughter's first cry. Around the fire, tribal elders watch with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright condemnation. His actions have implications far beyond one saved life, and everyone present understands the delicate balance of their situation. I followed the path grandmother showed me. Dakota replies, meeting his father's gaze without flinching. Life calls to life. The storm brought her to me, and the spirits demanded I choose protection over revenge. Elder Bidziel, whose own son died in the cavalry attack at Twin Rocks, leans forward with eyes like winter obsidian. And when her husband comes looking for justice, when soldiers follow his tracks back to our canyon, what protection will your mercy bring our children? The question hangs in the firelit air like smoke, because everyone knows Bidziel speaks truth. Apache survival depends on remaining hidden, on choosing battles carefully, on never giving the cavalry reason to hunt them with renewed vigor. One warrior's act of compassion could bring destruction to the entire band if handled wrongly. But Ayana's sister, ancient Desba, who remembers when whites first came to Apache land, speaks with the authority of someone who has witnessed the full cycle of conflict and peace. My sister delivered that boy when winter took his mother's milk, she says. nodding toward Dakota. Life has no color when it struggles to begin. The spirits chose him for this purpose, to show both peoples that some things matter more than war. The debate continues through the night, but Dakota barely hears the arguments swirling around him. His mind keeps returning to Sarah's green eyes when she held her daughter for the first time, to the way trust replaced fear when he proved his intentions through actions rather than words. Something fundamental shifted in that storm shelter. Some barrier between worlds that had seemed permanent suddenly revealed as fragile as morning frost. By dawn, Chief Hastian has made his decision. Dakota will not be punished for his mercy, but neither will the tribe openly support his choice. If consequences come, cavalry patrols, settler retaliation, demands for justice, the young warrior must face them alone. It's a compromise that satisfies no one but acknowledges the impossible position one act of compassion has created for them all. As the council fire dies to embers, Dakota realizes his rescue of Sarah McKenna has made him a bridge between two worlds, but bridges by their nature belong fully to neither side they connect. His choice to save her life has made him something unprecedented, an Apache warrior who must now navigate between the loyalty he owes his people and the responsibility he has accepted for protecting the woman and child whose lives he saved from the storm. The first test of this new reality comes sooner than anyone expects. 3 days after the council meeting, while Dakota checks snares in the pine forest above the canyon, he spots riders approaching the hidden valley, cavalry soldiers in blue uniforms, led by a man in civilian clothes, whose rigid posture and furious expression mark him as Thomas McKenna. They've followed the trail Sarah's husband left when he brought her home, and now they come seeking the Apache brave who rescued his wife. From his concealed position, Dakota counts 15 soldiers plus McKenna, too many to fight, too determined to evade permanently. Below in the canyon, his people go about their daily routines, unaware that their secret refuge has been discovered, unaware that the consequences of his mercy now ride toward them with cavalry precision and settler determination. The young warrior faces a moment that will define not only his own fate, but the future of everyone he has sworn to protect. He can flee deeper into the mountains, abandoning his people to face McKenna's questions and the cavalry's suspicions. He can return to warn the tribe, giving them time to scatter but ensuring the soldiers will find evidence of their presence. Or he can do something that has never been attempted in the long, bloody history between Apache and white settlers. He can step forward and face the consequences of his compassion directly, trusting that the woman whose life he saved will honor the debt between them. As the riders draw closer to the canyon's entrance, Dakota makes his choice. He rises from concealment, checks his rifle one final time, and begins walking down the mountainside toward a confrontation that will test whether mercy can survive in a world built on mutual hatred. Behind him, his people's survival hangs in the balance. Ahead, Thomas McKenna's face promises either gratitude or vengeance, and only Sarah's testimony will determine which. The mountain wind carries the scent of change as two worlds prepare to meet in the open, with all their prejudices and fears, their capacity for both cruelty and unexpected grace. What happens next will echo through generations, marking this day as either the beginning of understanding between enemies or the moment when compassion finally proved too fragile to survive the hatred men carry in their hearts. The confrontation unfolds in the meadow below the hidden canyon, where autumn grass waves like wheat beneath an October sky painted with the first hints of winter. Dakota emerges from the tree line with his hands clearly visible, his rifle slung across his back in a gesture that speaks of controlled strength rather than submission. He has chosen open ground deliberately, far enough from his people's refuge to protect their location, close enough to home ground that he moves with the confidence of someone who belongs to this landscape as naturally as the pines and granite outcroppings. Thomas McKenna dismounts with the stiff movements of a man who has spent 3 sleepless days wrestling with emotions that threaten to tear him apart. Gratitude wars with suspicion in his weathered face, relief at his family's survival battling against everything frontier life has taught him about trusting Indians. Behind him, Captain Russell Morrison and his cavalry patrol spread in a semicircle, hands resting on weapon grips, ready for violence that experience tells them must surely come. The two men study each other across 20 yards of mountain meadow, Apache warrior and Pennsylvania farmer, products of worlds so different they might as well speak different languages. Dakota sees the fear in McKenna's blue eyes, the way his fingers twitch toward the revolver on his hip, the rigid posture of someone preparing for betrayal. McKenna sees the scars across the brave's cheek, the eagle feathers marking him as a proven fighter, the casual competence of someone who could disappear into these mountains like smoke if he chose. "You're him," McKenna says finally, his voice carrying across the meadow with the flat certainty of accusation. The one who was there when my daughter was born. Dakota nods once, his dark eyes never leaving the white man's face. In careful English learned from traders and missionaries, he replies, "Your woman, she live. Baby live, that is good. My wife McKenna corrects sharply, as if proper terminology could somehow restore the natural order of things that has been so violently disrupted. Sarah is my wife. That was my child you delivered." The possessive pronouns hang in the cold air like challenges, but Dakota shows no reaction to their implications. He has faced grizzlies with less tension than this meeting generates, but he also recognizes something in McKenna's stance that goes beyond simple anger. This is a man terrified of owing a debt he cannot repay to someone his culture has taught him to consider an enemy. Captain Morrison steps forward, his cavalry saber catching sunlight as he moves. "Where are the others? Apache don't travel alone, especially not in winter. Where's your war party?" "No war party," Dakota responds calmly. "I hunt alone. Storm come, I hear crying, I help. That is all." The simplicity of his explanation only deepens McKenna's frustration. In his world, actions have complex motivations, hidden agendas, calculated gains and losses. The idea that this Apache brave risked his own safety to save complete strangers, white strangers, without expecting anything in return challenges everything he believes about Indians and honor, and the fundamental nature of racial loyalty. "My wife," McKenna begins, then stops, his voice thick with emotions he can barely name. "Sarah says you were gentle with her, says you knew what you were doing, delivering the baby, says you shared your food, kept her warm, never touched her inappropriately." The last words come out in a rush, as if speaking them aloud might somehow make their impossibility more believable. Dakota's expression doesn't change, but something flickers in his dark eyes, perhaps understanding of the assumptions McKenna couldn't help but make, perhaps sadness at the automatic suspicion that clouds even gratitude between their peoples. "Woman have baby, she need help, I give help. Nothing more, but why?" The question bursts from McKenna, like water from a broken dam, carrying with it all the confusion and conflict of the past 3 days. "Why help us? Your people are at war with mine. You had every reason to let her die, to take revenge for whatever we've done to your tribe. Why risk yourself for strangers?" For the first time, Dakota's stoic mask slips slightly, revealing grief that runs deeper than the mountain roots. "My brother die in your war, my mother die from white man's sickness. I have reasons for revenge." He pauses, his gaze moving to the high peaks where eagles circle. "But baby not no war, baby only no need. My grandmother teach me, life calls to life, death has too many helpers already." The words fall into silence, broken only by wind through pine needles and the distant cry of a hawk hunting in the clear mountain air. McKenna stares at this Apache warrior, who speaks of death and grandmother's wisdom with equal calm, trying to reconcile the savage of frontier legend with the man who saved his wife and child without expectation of reward or recognition. Captain Morrison, less interested in philosophy than practical concerns, presses the military agenda. "These mountains are supposed to be empty of hostiles. How many of your people are hiding up there? How long have you been using this territory for raids against settlements?" Dakota's attention shifts to the cavalry officer, and something hardens in his expression. This is familiar territory. The automatic assumption of guilt, the demand for information that could endanger his tribe, the military mind that sees every Indian as a potential threat to be eliminated or controlled. But before he can respond, an unexpected voice cuts through the tension. "Papa." Sarah McKenna appears at the meadow's edge, supported by Dr. Hayes and carrying a bundle wrapped in soft wool. Her newborn daughter, barely a week old, brought out in the cold air against all medical advice, because her husband's description of this confrontation filled her with dread for the man who saved her life. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" McKenna moves toward his wife with alarm and anger warring in his voice. "I needed to see him," Sarah interrupts, her green eyes locked on Dakota's face with an intensity that makes the assembled men uncomfortable. "I needed to thank him properly, and to make sure." She trails off, but everyone understands what remains unspoken. She needed to make sure her husband and these soldiers didn't repay mercy with violence. The reunion between rescuer and rescued unfolds with quiet dignity that defies every expectation of frontier drama. Sarah walks across the meadow with careful steps, her newborn daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms, and stops a respectful distance from the Apache brave who delivered the child in a blizzard shelter. For a long moment, they simply look at each other. The white woman who learned that survival sometimes requires trusting enemies, and the Apache warrior who chose compassion over the easier path of indifference. "She's beautiful," Dakota says softly, his eyes on the baby's peaceful face. "Strong lungs, like her mother." Sarah laughs, a sound like water over stones. She certainly announced her arrival loudly enough. Dr. Hayes says she's perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, healthy weight despite being early. She pauses, then adds with quiet intensity, "Thanks to you. Without your help, we both would have died in that storm." The baby chooses that moment to wake, her blue eyes opening to focus on Dakota's face with the solemn attention that newborns sometimes show. One tiny hand escapes the wool wrapping, and without thinking, Dakota extends his finger. The baby's grip closes around it with surprising strength, creating a connection that transcends all the racial barriers and cultural conflicts swirling around them. "She remembers you," Sarah whispers, tears brightening her eyes. She knows you're the first person she saw in this world. Thomas McKenna watches this exchange with emotions too complex for words. The sight of his daughter, his white daughter, gripping an Apache warrior's finger with obvious trust challenges every assumption he brought to this meeting. This is not the scenario of captivity and violation that frontier legends prepared him for. This is something unprecedented, genuine gentleness between supposed enemies, based on shared experience of life's most fundamental miracle. Captain Morrison, uncomfortable with sentiment that complicates his mission, clears his throat pointedly. "This is all very touching, but we still have military concerns. Mrs. McKenna, can you provide information about this Indian's companions? Did you see evidence of other hostiles in the area?" Sarah's expression hardens as she turns to face the cavalry officer. "This man saved my life and my daughter's life. He shared his food, kept us warm, delivered my baby with skill that rivals any doctor I've known. If you're looking for hostiles, Captain, I suggest you look elsewhere. You understand nothing." Sarah's voice carries a strength that surprises everyone present, including herself. "You weren't there in that storm. You didn't see him choose to help instead of harm, to risk his own safety for strangers who had no claim on his mercy. This man is not your enemy. He's a guardian angel who happened to have red skin instead of white wings." The defense of Dakota by a white woman creates ripples of shock through the assembled soldiers, but it's Thomas McKenna's reaction that will ultimately matter most. He stands frozen between his wife's conviction and his own ingrained prejudices, between gratitude for his family's survival and fear of appearing weak before his peers, between the evidence of his own eyes and the teachings of a lifetime spent learning to distrust Indians. "Sarah," he says carefully, "you've been through a terrible ordeal. Sometimes trauma can make us see things differently than they really happened. Don't you dare tell me I don't remember clearly." Sarah's interruption carries the fierce protectiveness of a mother defending not just her own experience, but the honor of the man who made her daughter's survival possible. "I remember every moment of that night, the pain, the fear, the certainty that we were going to die. And I remember his hands, gentle and sure, bringing our daughter safely into the world. I remember his voice, calm and reassuring, when I thought the storm would kill us all." She turns back to Dakota, who has listened to this exchange with the patient attention of someone accustomed to having his fate decided by others. "I don't know your name, I don't know your story, but I know what you did for us, and I know it came from goodness, not calculation." "Dakota," he says simply. "My name is Dakota, Dakota," Sarah repeats, as if testing the sound. "It's beautiful. What does it mean?" "Friend to all," Dakota replies, and the irony is not lost on anyone present. As the afternoon sun begins its descent toward the western peaks, the confrontation reaches a moment of decision that will shape the future for everyone involved. Thomas McKenna must choose between the fear that has guided frontier survival and the gratitude that his wife's testimony demands. Captain Morrison must decide whether military protocol requires pursuing an Indian who has committed no crime beyond being in the wrong place at an inconveniently merciful time. And Dakota must determine whether revealing himself was an act of courage that will open new possibilities, or a miscalculation that will bring danger to his people. The baby sleeping in Sarah's arms represents the future, a generation that might learn different lessons about enemies and friendship, about the possibility of trust across the deepest cultural divides. But that future depends on the choices made by adults who carry the weight of history's hatred and the surprising burden of unexpected mercy. The decision comes not from speeches or arguments, but from a moment of pure human recognition. As Captain Morrison steps forward to place Dakota under arrest, more for the sake of military protocol than from any specific charges, Sarah's daughter begins to cry with the particular urgency that new parents learn to dread. The baby's wails pierce the meadow's tense silence, and before anyone can react, Dakota moves with practiced ease. "May I?" he asks Sarah, extending his hands toward the crying infant. Without hesitation, Sarah places her daughter in the Apache brave's arms. Dakota shifts the baby to his shoulder, begins a gentle swaying motion, and hums a traditional lullaby that his grandmother once sang to calm restless children. The effect is immediate. The crying stops, replaced by contented baby sounds that speak of complete trust and security. Thomas McKenna watches his week-old daughter settle peacefully in the arms of an Apache warrior, and something fundamental shifts in his understanding of the world. This is not the behavior of a savage or an enemy. This is a man who understands children, who has probably delivered other babies, who treats McKenna's most precious possession with gentleness that surpasses even the baby's own parents' nervous handling. "Where did you learn to do that?" McKenna asks, his voice stripped of hostility for the first time since the confrontation began. "My grandmother," Dakota replies, still swaying gently with the now quiet baby. "She delivered babies for our people. I help her many times. Children are gift from spirits. They must be welcomed with gentleness." The image of this scarred warrior, learning midwifery from his grandmother, of Apache women teaching their men to assist in the sacred work of bringing life into the world, challenges every assumption about Indian savagery that frontier culture has drilled into McKenna's consciousness. He finds himself seeing Dakota not as a racial enemy, but as a man shaped by family love and cultural wisdom, not so different from the values that drive McKenna's own determination to protect his wife and child. Captain Morrison, growing increasingly uncomfortable with the humanitarian direction of this encounter, makes one final attempt to reassert military authority. "Require what exactly?" Dr. Hayes interrupts, his medical authority lending weight to his challenge. "Arresting a man for delivering a baby, for providing medical assistance to a woman in distress. Captain, I've examined both mother and child thoroughly. There's no evidence of any crime here, quite the contrary. This man's actions were those of a skilled birth attendant, not a hostile combatant. He's an Apache warrior in territory that's supposed to be secured," Morrison argues, but his conviction wavers under the collective weight of the testimonies arrayed against him. "He's a human being who chose to save lives instead of taking them," Sarah states firmly, accepting her daughter back from Dakota's arms. "And if your regulations punish that kind of choice, then your regulations are wrong." The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but resolution comes from an unexpected source. A new rider appears at the meadow's edge, Reverend Joshua Whitfield, the Methodist minister who serves Willow Creek's spiritual needs and has ridden hard from town with news that changes everything. "McKenna," the Reverend calls as he spurs his horse across the meadow. "Thank God I found you in time. Sarah's in labor, the baby's coming early, and Dr. Hayes says." He stops mid-sentence as he takes in the scene, Sarah holding a baby, Dakota standing peacefully among armed soldiers, everyone very much alive and unmurdered. "Reverend," Dr. Hayes says with dry humor, "I believe you're a week behind the current situation." As explanations tumble forth, Reverend Whitfield's presence adds a dimension that none of the other participants could provide: moral authority rooted in Christian teaching, perspective shaped by theological training rather than military doctrine or frontier pragmatism. He listens to the accounts with the careful attention of someone accustomed to weighing the spiritual implications of human actions. "This man," the Reverend says finally, looking directly at Dakota, "acted as the Good Samaritan in Christ's parable, offering aid to strangers who had every reason to expect hostility instead of help. Are we to punish him for demonstrating Christian mercy better than most Christians manage?" The theological framework reframes the entire confrontation, casting Dakota not as a hostile to be contained, but as an instrument of divine providence who saved Christian lives when other Christians were nowhere to be found. For Thomas McKenna, raised in Pennsylvania's Methodist traditions, the Reverend's interpretation provides a way to accept his family's rescue without betraying his cultural identity. But he's not Christian, Captain Morrison objects, grasping for some way to maintain the racial and religious boundaries that military life requires. Who acted more Christ-like than any of us would have in his position? Reverend Whitfield interrupts with gentle firmness. Captain, I've read my scripture thoroughly, and nowhere does Jesus require proper baptism as a prerequisite for showing mercy to strangers. The debate continues as afternoon shadows lengthen across the meadow, but the outcome becomes increasingly clear. Sarah's testimony, Dr. Hayes's medical confirmation, Reverend Whitfield's theological support, and most importantly, Thomas McKenna's gradual acceptance of his own gratitude, all combined to create something unprecedented in the history of Apache-white relations, official recognition that an Indian's mercy deserves protection rather than punishment. When Captain Morrison finally orders his men to mount up for the return to the fort, it's with the understanding that no hostile activity has been discovered, no crimes have been committed, and no military action is warranted. Takota remains free, his location revealed but his people's sanctuary preserved, his choice to show mercy validated by the very authorities he might have expected to destroy him for it. As the soldiers ride away, followed by Dr. Hayes and Reverend Whitfield, the meadow grows quiet except for the sound of wind through pine needles and a baby's contented murmurs. 3 people remain, Apache brave white woman and the child whose birth created a bridge between worlds that had seemed forever separated by hatred and mistrust. But even this moment of peaceful resolution carries the seeds of future conflict. Word of the events will spread throughout both communities, challenging long-held beliefs and threatening those whose power depends on maintaining strict racial boundaries. Takota's mercy has saved more than Sarah and her daughter. It has opened a crack in the wall of assumptions that justifies endless war between red and white. And cracks, once opened, have a tendency to widen under pressure. The real test of whether compassion can survive in a world built on mutual hatred has only just begun. Winter settles over the territory like a promise kept, bringing with it the harsh realities that follow moments of grace. In Willow Creek, Sarah McKenna tends her daughter beside a warm stove while her husband wrestles with gratitude that grows more complicated with each passing day. The baby thrives, Lucy Sarah McKenna, named for her grandmother and mother, but carrying in her young life the invisible weight of being saved by hands that many consider enemy. Thomas finds himself defending Takota's actions in conversations where he never intended to take sides, his farmer's practicality warring with lifetime prejudices every time someone questions his judgment. Sam Garrison leads the whispered campaign of doubt. Loose Indian delivers your baby, and suddenly you trust their whole tribe. Mark my words, McKenna, this was just the beginning of their plan. They've got your scent now, and they'll come for more. But Garrison's influence wanes against the daily evidence of Lucy's health and Sarah's unwavering testimony. The baby grows plump and alert, showing no signs of whatever contamination or curse the town's pessimists predicted from her unconventional birth. More significantly, Sarah herself becomes an unexpected advocate for understanding between the communities, speaking with quiet authority born from experience that none of her critics can match. I know what I saw, she tells Mary Holbrook during one of their afternoon visits. I know the gentleness in his hands, the skill he showed, the risks he took for strangers who had never shown him kindness. You can call it savage intuition if that makes you feel better, but I call it human decency, something that seems to be in shorter supply among civilized folk than we'd like to admit. Meanwhile, in the hidden canyon that shelters Takota's people, winter brings its own challenges. The young warriors' revelation of their location to cavalry soldiers created tensions that simmer beneath the surface of daily survival routines. Some tribal members blame him for endangering the entire band, others secretly admire his courage in choosing mercy over safety. Chief Hastian maintains careful neutrality, but the division weakens tribal unity at a time when winter's hardships demand complete cooperation. Takota finds himself increasingly isolated, belonging fully to neither the war faction that sees his mercy as betrayal, nor the peace faction that views his actions as naive idealism. He spends his days hunting alone, providing meat for the tribe while avoiding the political complexities his choice created. In the long winter evenings, he sits beside his grandmother's empty place and wonders if Ayana would approve of the path her teachings led him to walk. The first test of the fragile peace comes in February, when military dispatches report increased Apache activity in the southern regions. Captain Morrison, under pressure from territorial authorities to demonstrate progress in pacifying hostile tribes, requests permission to investigate the canyon where Takota's people shelter. His superiors approve, seeing an opportunity to relocate a band of peaceful Indians to reservation land where they can be properly monitored and controlled. But the cavalry's return to the sacred canyon meets with different responses than anyone expected. Thomas McKenna, learning of the planned action through his connections in town, makes an unprecedented decision. He rides out alone to find Dakota, carrying a message that will test whether the trust built during one storm night can survive the harsh light of political reality. The meeting takes place in the same meadow where their first confrontation unfolded, but winter has transformed the landscape into something stark and beautiful. Snow covers the ground in pristine drifts, and pine trees wear white mantles that make them look like frozen sentinels. Dakota emerges from the tree line with the same calm dignity he showed months earlier, but McKenna notices new lines around the Apache brave's eyes, the weight of consequences that mercy sometimes carries. "They're coming for your people," McKenna says without preamble, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Morrison convinced his superiors that your band needs to be relocated to the reservation. They'll arrive within the week. Dakota receives this news with the stoic acceptance of someone who has always known that hiding could only last so long. "And you come to warn enemies of your own people?" "I come to warn the man who saved my family," McKenna replies firmly. "Sarah would never forgive me if I let Morrison surprise you, and I owe you more than I can ever repay." The debt of gratitude hangs between them like a bridge neither man knows how to cross. McKenna owes his daughter's life to this Apache warrior, but paying that debt requires betraying his own race's military objectives. Dakota recognizes the sacrifice such a warning represents, but accepting it means acknowledging that individual white men might be capable of honor and friendship. "Your warning gives us time to run deeper into the mountains," Dakota says finally. "But winter hunting is poor in the high country. Old ones and young ones may not survive until spring. There might be another way," McKenna replies, the words coming slowly as if he's testing their weight. "What if your people came to the reservation voluntarily? What if it was presented as a choice rather than a forced relocation?" Morrison's orders are to pacify hostiles, not to punish Indians who've shown friendly intentions. The suggestion carries implications that neither man fully understands. A voluntary move to reservation land would require Chief Hostine to negotiate directly with territorial authorities, abandoning the traditional Apache strategy of avoiding contact with white governments entirely. But it would also legitimize Dakota's people as something other than hostiles to be hunted, potentially opening doors for future cooperation rather than endless conflict. "My father would need guarantees," Dakota says carefully. "Safety for our people, hunting rights during good seasons, respect for our ways among your laws. I can't promise what the territorial governor will agree to," McKenna admits, "but I can promise to speak for your character, for what you did during the storm. Sarah can testify to Morrison and his superiors about your actions. Reverend Whitfield will support our account. He's already been preaching about good Samaritans who come in unexpected forms." The negotiation that follows unfolds over several days, with McKenna serving as an unlikely intermediary between Apache leadership and territorial authorities. The arrangement they eventually reach satisfies no one completely, but provides a framework for coexistence that seemed impossible just months earlier. Dakota's band will relocate to reservation land during winter months, receiving government supplies and protection. In return, they will serve as scouts and guides for peaceful settlement activities, using their knowledge of the territory to help rather than hinder white expansion. The agreement's most innovative provision concerns Dakota himself. Recognizing his unique status as a bridge between communities, territorial authorities offer him a position as official liaison between reservation Apache and local settlements. He would live between both worlds, carrying messages and mediating disputes, using his credibility with both sides to prevent conflicts before they escalate to violence. Sarah McKenna learns of these developments through her husband's careful explanations, her baby daughter playing contentedly in her lap as Thomas describes the new world their rescue has helped create. Lucy grows more beautiful each day, her auburn hair brightening and her blue eyes developing the alert intelligence that comes from being surrounded by love and security. "He's going to live between both worlds," Sarah muses, stroking Lucy's soft hair. "That won't be easy for him. Neither side will ever fully trust someone who serves both." "Maybe that's exactly what both sides need," Thomas replies, surprising himself with the thought. Someone who belongs enough to each community to understand their fears, but stands apart enough to see beyond them. The transition to this new arrangement faces immediate challenges. Many Apache tribal members resist the idea of reservation life, viewing it as surrender disguised as cooperation. White settlers express skepticism about trusting Indians with access to their communities, even Indians who have proven friendly intentions. Military authorities worry about setting precedents that might encourage other tribes to demand similar negotiated arrangements rather than accepting forced relocation. But the most significant resistance comes from Samuel Garrison and his faction of white supremacists who see any accommodation with Indians as betrayal of proper racial hierarchy. They organize opposition meetings, circulate petitions demanding military action against all Apache bands, and spread rumors designed to undermine confidence in the negotiated agreement. McKenna's gone soft, Garrison declares at one such meeting. One Indian shows him a little kindness, and suddenly he thinks they're all ready to live like Christians. Mark my words, this so-called peace arrangement is just giving them time to plan a massacre. We should clean them out while we know where they are. The opposition campaign gains momentum through the spring, as settlers who have never encountered Dakota personally find it easier to trust familiar prejudices than unfamiliar hopes. Economic concerns add fuel to the fire. Reservation Apache would have hunting and trading rights that might compete with white trappers and merchants. Political ambitions enter the mix as local officials position themselves for territorial elections by appealing to voters' racial anxieties. The crisis comes to a head in early summer when a young Apache hunter from Dakota's band accidentally crosses onto private land while pursuing wounded deer. The property owner, influenced by Garrison's propaganda, shoots first and investigates later, wounding the hunter seriously. The incident provides exactly the kind of inflammatory material that opponents of the peace arrangement need to justify abandoning negotiated cooperation in favor of military force. Dakota receives word of the shooting while conducting his first official mission as tribal liaison, escorting a government surveyor through territory that his people know better than any map can reveal. The surveyor, a young man named David Chen who emigrated from California, has worked carefully to build trust with his Apache guides, treating them as professional equals rather than supervised primitives. This changes everything, Chen tells Dakota when riders bring news of the shooting. The territorial authorities will use this as justification for revoking the agreement. They'll say Apache can't be trusted to respect property boundaries, that negotiated peace was a mistake. Dakota understands the political implications better than Chen realizes. One wounded hunter has provided opponents of peace with exactly the ammunition they need to destroy months of careful diplomatic progress. Unless something dramatic shifts public opinion back toward cooperation, the fragile bridge between communities will collapse under the weight of renewed hostility. The solution comes from an unexpected source. Sarah McKenna, learning of the crisis through her husband's government connections, makes a decision that shocks everyone who knows her. Despite having a 6-month-old baby and no experience with public speaking, she announces her intention to address the territorial hearing that will determine the peace agreement's fate. "I'm the only white woman who has direct experience with Apache mercy," she tells Thomas as she prepares for the journey to the territorial capital. "My testimony carries weight that no man's arguments can match. If I don't speak now, in Lucy's behalf as much as Dakota's, then everything he risked to save us will be wasted." The hearing draws spectators from across the territory, ranchers and farmers, military officers and civilian officials, newspaper reporters and curious townspeople, eager to witness what many expect will be the final collapse of an idealistic experiment in racial cooperation. Samuel Garrison and his supporters attend in force, confident that the recent shooting incident will vindicate their opposition to trusting Indians with any form of autonomy. Sarah arrives at the territorial courthouse carrying Lucy in her arms, a young mother whose calm dignity contrasts sharply with the heated rhetoric that has dominated previous discussions. She waits patiently through testimony from military experts, economic analyses from territorial officials, and passionate speeches from both supporters and opponents of the peace agreement. When her turn comes to speak, the courtroom falls silent with anticipation. 6 months ago, she begins, her voice clear and steady despite her nervousness, "I was dying in a blizzard with my unborn child, abandoned by the storm and forgotten by my own kind. The only person who came to help us wore Apache clothing and spoke a different language, but he saved both our lives with skill that any doctor would envy and gentleness that any mother would appreciate." She pauses, adjusting Lucy in her arms as the baby looks around the courtroom with bright, curious eyes. "This is my daughter Lucy, delivered by Apache hands in conditions that should have killed us both. She's healthy, beautiful, and alive because a man named Dakota chose mercy over indifference, protection over revenge, life over death." The testimony continues for nearly an hour, as Sarah describes not just the rescue itself but the character it revealed, Dakota's knowledge of childbirth, his careful attention to both mother and baby's needs, his decision to share limited supplies with strangers who belonged to an enemy race. She speaks of his grandmother's teachings about the sacred nature of life, his own losses that could have justified hatred, his choice to honor healing wisdom rather than warrior traditions. The man who shot our Apache hunter this week acted from fear and prejudice, Sarah concludes, her voice growing stronger as she reaches her final argument. The man who delivered my daughter acted from courage and compassion. If we judge all Apache by the actions of their best representative, just as we ask them to judge all whites by our finest examples, then we choose hope over hatred, future over past, life over death. As she finishes speaking, Lucy begins to cry, not the frantic wails of distress, but the hungry protests of a healthy baby who has grown accustomed to having her needs met promptly. Sarah begins to nurse her daughter right there in the courtroom, an image of peaceful domestic normalcy that transforms the entire political debate into something personal and immediate. The territorial officials adjourn for deliberation, but the hearing's outcome has already been determined by the simple power of truth, spoken by someone who lived through events that others can only imagine. When they reconvene 3 hours later, it's to announce not just the continuation of the peace agreement, but its expansion into a model program that other territories will be encouraged to adopt. Dakota learns of the decision while hunting in the high meadows above the reservation, where summer grass grows thick and elk come to feed in the early morning hours. A rider from the territorial capital brings word that the peace arrangement will continue, that his position as liaison has been made permanent, and that Sarah McKenna's testimony has shifted public opinion toward supporting cooperation rather than demanding military action. The news carries both celebration and responsibility. The immediate crisis has passed, but the larger challenge of building lasting trust between communities remains as difficult as ever. Dakota's unique role as a bridge between worlds has been validated by territorial authorities, but it's a bridge that must be crossed daily by people carrying the weight of historical grievances and cultural fears. As summer progresses, the first fruits of the peace arrangement begin to appear. Apache scouts help territorial surveyors map safe routes through mountain terrain, preventing the kind of mistakes that have led to deadly confrontations in the past. White traders begin offering fair prices for Apache crafts and hunting products, creating economic incentives for cooperation. Most significantly, a few brave individuals from both communities begin the slow work of building personal relationships across racial lines. Thomas McKenna finds himself becoming an unofficial advocate for the peace process, using his credibility as a farmer and family man to counter Garrison's continued opposition. Sarah develops friendships with Apache women who come to trade at the reservation post, learning traditional weaving techniques while teaching them English words that make transactions easier. Lucy grows into a healthy, curious toddler, whose auburn hair and bright smile make her a favorite among people of both races. But the most important development occurs when Dakota makes a decision that will test the limits of interracial trust. Recognizing that his effectiveness as a liaison depends on understanding both communities deeply, he asks Thomas McKenna for permission to spend several weeks living with a white family, learning their customs and daily routines as thoroughly as he knows Apache ways. The request creates another crisis of confidence for McKenna. Inviting an Apache warrior into his home, allowing him to observe his family's most private moments, trusting him with access to their vulnerabilities, it demands a level of faith that frontier experience counsels against. But Sarah's response is immediate and definitive. "He's already seen me at my most vulnerable," she points out. "He's already proven what he'll do with access to white helplessness. If we don't trust him now, after everything that's happened, then we don't deserve the peace he's trying to build." The arrangement that follows becomes the subject of intense scrutiny from both communities. Apache tribal members worry that Dakota's extended contact with white culture will corrupt his loyalty to their traditions. White settlers watch nervously for signs that close association with Indians will contaminate the McKenna family's racial purity. But the daily reality proves less dramatic than either side's fears predicted. Dakota fits into the McKenna household with the same quiet competence he showed during the storm rescue. He helps with farm work, sharing techniques for reading weather patterns and tracking animals that Thomas finds genuinely useful. He plays with Lucy, teaching her Apache words while learning English nursery rhymes that make her laugh. Most importantly, he demonstrates through countless small interactions that racial difference need not create personal enmity. The breakthrough moment comes during harvest season, when Thomas injures his back severely enough to threaten the year's crop. Without being asked, Dakota takes over the heavy labor, working from dawn to dusk to save wheat that represents the family's economic survival. He recruits other Apache men to help, creating the first example of organized cooperation between red and white workers in the territory's history. Samuel Garrison and his supporters try to make political capital from the arrangement, claiming that McKenna's dependence on Indian labor proves the corrupting influence of racial mixing. But their arguments ring hollow against the evidence of successful cooperation, of crops saved through mutual aid, of relationships built on shared work rather than shared prejudice. By winter's return, the peace arrangement has evolved into something that neither side originally envisioned, not just an absence of conflict, but the beginning of genuine community integration. Apache and white children play together at the trading post. Families from both races attend church services where Reverend Whitfield preaches about the universal brotherhood of all God's children. Most significantly, intermarriage begins to occur, creating families that belong fully to both traditions while transcending the limitations of either. The transformation isn't complete or universal. Pockets of resistance remain in both communities. People who can never accept that enemies might become allies, that racial boundaries might prove less important than individual character. Violence still erupts occasionally, usually triggered by misunderstandings that careful communication might have prevented. The peace remains fragile, dependent on the continued goodwill of individuals who choose cooperation over conflict. But something fundamental has changed in the relationship between Apache and white communities, something that began with one man's decision to choose mercy over revenge during a blizzard night. Dakota's rescue of Sarah and Lucy McKenna opened a crack in the wall of mutual hatred, and that crack has gradually widened into a doorway through which people of both races can pass toward a future neither could have imagined alone. The true measure of that transformation becomes clear the following spring, when Sarah McKenna gives birth to her second child, a son born in the same bedroom where Dakota spent his weeks learning white family customs. This time, the delivery is attended by both Dr. Hayes and an Apache midwife, with Dakota serving as translator and cultural liaison. The boy arrives healthy and strong, inheriting his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin. They name him Thomas Dakota McKenna, honoring both his father and the Apache brave whose mercy created the possibility for his existence. It's a name that carries the weight of two worlds, the hope of a generation that might learn to see difference as richness rather than threat. The promise that children born into peace might grow up never knowing the particular hatred that once seemed natural between red and white. As Dakota holds the newborn boy for the first time, he thinks of his grandmother Ayanna and the wisdom she shared beside countless council fires. Listen, life calls to life. Death has too many helpers already. Asterisk. The baby's strong grip around his finger feels like approval from the spirits, like confirmation that mercy shown to strangers can indeed change the world one life at a time. Outside, spring rain falls on land where Apache and white families now work side by side, where children of different races play together without fear, where the future grows like new grass from soil watered with tears but nourished by hope. The storm that brought Dakota and Sarah together has passed, but the changes it created continue to spread like ripples across the entire territory. In the years that follow, Thomas Dakota McKenna will grow up speaking both English and Apache, comfortable in both worlds, carrying in his mixed heritage the living proof that enemies can become family when mercy overcomes hatred. His sister Lucy will marry a young Apache man whose grandfather fought in the wars, creating grandchildren who belong to no single race but to a future where such categories matter less than individual worth. Dakota himself will continue serving as a bridge between communities, growing old in the work of translation, not just of languages, but of hopes and fears and dreams that prove surprisingly similar across racial lines. His choice to save two strangers in a blizzard will echo through generations, a reminder that the most important battles are fought not between armies but within individual hearts that must choose between compassion and indifference. The mountain where Lucy McKenna first drew breath stands unchanged, its peaks still crowned with snow, its canyons still sheltering life that endures through every storm. But the people who call it home have been transformed by one night when an Apache brave looked into the storm and heard the cry of new life calling for help. In answering that call, he didn't just save two lives, he opened a door between worlds that had seemed forever closed, proving that mercy has power to change not just individual destinies but the course of history itself. And in the end, that may be the greatest lesson of all, that peace begins not with treaties or laws or military victories, but with individual human beings who choose to see strangers as potential friends, who choose protection over revenge, who choose the difficult path of understanding over the easy road of hatred. Dakota's mercy during one blizzard night planted seeds that grew into a forest of friendship, proving that even the deepest divisions can be bridged when people have courage enough to meet each other not as enemies, but as fellow travelers sharing the same uncertain journey toward hope.